the proverbial Hiya Hiya with Jay Sorensen on camera. If those of you who are able to get this on camera, those who don't, you would be deprived of watching one of the most handsome sidekicks ever in American history. Wait a minute. Ed McMahon died. I think he died. Do you think Johnny Carson left Ed McMahon out of his book? You got your hand in front of the screen. We can't see you. Did Johnny Carson leave Ed McMahon out of his book?
No.
Okay, so...
I don't think so.
No. So what's the big deal here? I left you out of my book?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not even mentioned in it.
Well, why? How come?
Because I think I was we weren't working together at that point.
Oh, so out of sight, out of mind. Is that it? Out of sight, out of mind?
Well, I don't think it was done on purpose, Joey. I'm not mad at you or anything. Never have been. But I wondered why there was no mention whatsoever. Just wondered because let's face it, you asked me to be your sidekick at WNBC, and I had to go through the process of talking with every suit in that damn building at 30 Rock because they wanted someone who, A, could handle you, and they wanted somebody that could control you sometimes.
Well, even John Tenaglia, when I worked in, can you hear me? When I worked with John Tenaglia at WSHE in Miami, he tried to get my wife to handle me because he couldn't handle me. Nobody could ever manage me.
No.
That's what they said.
Well, that's what it was basically to make sure you showed up on time, that you got there, you went to meetings, that's pretty much what it was about. It was not about content. It was never about content because nobody can control what you're going to say. Nobody can. I couldn't. I can't control what I say half the time.
Well, you've been a program director. You're a program director. That's the enemy.
Well, for you it is. Anybody in a suit is an enemy. Yeah.
Well, I used to say that at NBC at NBC they had a Lipton's cup of soup. Remember? So what happened to those guys? Where are they all now? Where are those suits?
Well, Dale Parsons is living the life of leisure in Hawaii on Maui. John Hayes ran a major corporation of radio stations in Canada. He was the general manager of WNBC when we were there. At least the first part of when we were there. He left not long after you did, I think, as a matter of fact. And he ran very successfully a group of nationwide stations in Canada. As far as the other people upstairs,
they all died. They all died, Jay.
Every one of them?
Yes.
Every single one. Yeah. And you killed them.
No, but they were meant to leave long before this virus. Incidentally, you know what? You're not a program director anymore, but you are an influencer now.
Well, yeah. It's funny. I have programmed radio stations. And, in fact, the one where I met you, I programmed for a year after you left. And that was an interesting situation. In Lakewood, successfully, New Jersey 101.5 was the founding program director. And it was Walt Sabo's idea. He was a consultant, and he came up with the idea of calling it New Jersey 101.5 and doing stuff for New Jersey that nobody else was doing. And it's a state that has an inferiority complex because it's locked between New York and Philadelphia, and that's been going on since the beginning of our country, or before the beginning of our country. It was always Philly, New York, Philly, New York.
Yeah.
And the things in between, we were dinosaurs, according to them. And it's always been like that. And yet, half the Revolutionary War was fought in New Jersey. I digress. So when we put that station together, I took a lot of what you had taught me about the station in Lakewood that you programmed and managed for a few years. And I used some of those things that I learned and put them to use at that station. Not a lot of people realize that. They will now. That a lot of the ideas that I don't think Walter Sabo got the idea by listening to that station. However, he listened to me talk about some of the things that I did there or we did there, and it made sense in a lot of regard. You know, we did not do unscheduled news like we did in at the smaller station, an AM station, on the FM station that we did. But other than that, it was not highly formatted. The jocks and the talk show hosts basically did what they wanted. And, you know, you can control personalities to a point. And I think that's what's wrong with radio today. My God, television too. It's formatted beyond control, and you have to let people with talent be talented. And I learned that from you because I watched how much you were able to ad lib, insert your personality into something. And you know, I helped guys like, and I not bringing anybody up for any reason other than Jim Gerhardt, who had worked at WNBC way before we did in the early 60s. And
so did George. So did George Carlin.
Yes, he did. As a matter of fact, and so people like John and Ken, who are now on KFI and have been for 20-something years now.
Yeah. And they're still taking the same. They're still taking. They're taking the same phone call. It's 27 years later.
Guy. He just calls in a different. He calls in a different voice. You know, one day it's like this, and the next day it's like this. You know? He imitates women too. It's, Sean, I really love the way you look on radio. You know. Anyway, so we have that, and we also had very talented news people as well, who were able to tell the story in a conversational way. And telling stories, I think, if there's anything that I ever took away from you, was telling stories. You have to tell stories. Now, I may not tell them the same way you do, but when I've been on myself or with a partner, boy, I always do my best to tell a story. You know, even if it's an innocuous story, I tell a story.
Well,
and then I let the audience tell a story.
Let a Smile Be Your Umbrella is my book, which tells a story.
Yeah.
It's my story.
Yes.
As told by me and written by me and corrected by me, because in these last couple of months, we've been correcting my story by me. Now, the one part
which I have,
you wouldn't want to be a part of the 40 jobs I had.
No, no, not some of them. Some of them maybe, but not many of them. No.
All right. So, but I left you out of the book. Now, I didn't intentionally leave you out of the book, but there must be some questions you have. There's got to be something you want to know that got left out there. Maybe not.
Well, there are. You've never said which was your favorite radio station or TV job. You've never really. I don't think I've ever heard you tell anybody or me, if you had to pick from all of the 8,900 jobs that you've had, which one was the most satisfying? Which one do you think was the most fun? You know, that sort of thing. I think a lot of people want to know that. I think it's more inside the business, perhaps, but as a viewer, listener, you know, I would like to hear what you think was the most fun or the best job you ever had.
Well, that's like asking Frankie Valli which of his songs is his favorite, you know. I mean, it depends.
He does have certain favorite songs, yes.
Yeah. Well, my favorite stations were categorically, during the earlier days, I had a blast at WKBW because it was freeform. And it was the first time that nobody ever stopped me from being crazy. And up until then, they were all trying to make me what they were. And then I started to make them what I was. And that was the fun. So when you become powerful enough to change the system, that's when it's fun. You know, you got Howard Stern did that, you know, when he got popular enough after he got fired at NBC. But because you get more powerful, when you get more powerful, they kind of leave you alone, and you become the cookie cutter. It becomes you.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, I was able to be who I was on KB. That was the acronym, KB. So I loved it,
right.
and it was fun. But then,
but that was only 3 years. That was only 3 years of your major career.
That was my favorite of the freeform. And then later on,
okay,
there were ones I didn't like. That's a longer list.
It's another category.
But there are certain things I liked about some of them, like WXYZ. I liked the whole town of Detroit. I liked playing that town because of Motown, and I made it No Town. Is what I did. And when I went to Philly, I wasn't really very happy with Philly. I liked the city. I didn't like the station. I had a hard time at the station. Not in ratings. I always had good ratings. I just had a hard time, and I started drinking more than I should have back then. And not
this
on the air.
WIBG?
Well, I wasn't really happy with how that was going. And I kind of, when the Beatles came along, they got bigger than us. And they got bigger than the personalities, and that kind of threw a damper on the whole idea of being a superstar. And the idea of this was to become a celebrity, so that you could, people would ask you, how do you want your steak, and where do you want to sit? And when you're out of it, then you get in line like everybody else today, waiting for your hamburger or your flu shot. Nobody really has a corner on the market until they're famous or powerful. And that was the only reason to be famous, because it's a pain in the ass to be famous.
Yeah, it is. Let me know how it is, because I don't know.
Well, it's not fun, because nobody leaves you alone. And you can't, you want some privacy sometimes. You also want to be able to do what you always did and get away with it. But, you learn to play the game. So, in answer to your question, my other favorite station was, I would say systematically, it became KOA in Denver on the television part. But the radio part sucked because that guy didn't like television. And the television guy didn't like radio. So I had to play both mediums. I was on radio and television, and I'm bouncing one between the other. You can't hold something up on camera without saying something, but you have to do that when you have a radio station that you're on. Because you can't hold something up on radio. So, you learn the tricks of the trade. But I like the idea of it. I like the satellite show, which was not a radio station, but it was on every station. I liked being the first satellite guy. I liked being a lot of things that were first. And then I wanted to go home. After I got it done, I didn't want to do it anymore. I got bored. Even Carolyn, my wife, said at the time, she said, you get bored with everything. I said, yeah, because I've done it already.
Because you've done it, right? Yeah,
I can't imagine. I loved Bruce Morrow. I love Cousin Brucey. I can't imagine sitting there playing those 300 records again and again and again.
Leslie Gore.
I can't, or any of them. I did this already, but that's my personality, I'm not that much.
Speaking of records.
What?
Speaking of records, I hate to interrupt you, but I have to.
The other station that I didn't answer your question totally. The other station was WOR, and then my next favorite was NBC in New York because we had a lot of fun there, and we were making new ways there because we had a challenge. Now, that's what I liked. I want to answer it because you're involved in this.
Okay.
We were in the footsteps of Howard Stern, and, he had a big footprint. And everybody was listening to him because he was the flavor of the month, and then when he got fired, we didn't come right away, but they called us months later, and we replaced him. At least they waited a little time, but we replaced the time slot. But we made another show out of it. We didn't follow what he did. I didn't do what he did, and I didn't care what he did. I liked what he did for him, but I liked what we did for us. And I think you can like, Howard Johnson's, or what did we used to say, Dale Parsons. I love his expression when he said, cream rises. And I said, yeah, cream rises. And he said, and so does shit. So I liked the shit that we were doing. I thought it was good shit. Yeah, we were fun.
It was.
And we did a lot of, we had to be different than everybody else before us.
That's true. Yeah, We couldn't be what Howard did,
No.
so it made no sense. You had to be, but you had to be you, and the real Joey shined through in so many ways. Look at when the helicopter went down with Jane Dornak.
Yeah.
My God, I've never heard anyone do a program under that kind of duress, if you will, the way you did that day. And I didn't know what to say. And I had been in the business, 16 years at that point. And I was at a loss for words because I was so touched by what happened. But I was touched even more by how you conducted yourself that day. And I've listened to that show a few times. It's very painful to listen to, but
I haven't. I have not listened to it.
No, and I'll tell you, you had a lot of empathy for not only her but her family, her child, the audience who went along, who heard it live on the air, and it was such a very traumatic way she died. I mean, it was just awful. It was just absolutely terrible. They couldn't get her out of her seat in the back seat of the helicopter. They couldn't get the seatbelt off of her, frankly. That's what happened, and then she drowned. I can't imagine going that way. But we didn't know all that right away. But when we came back the next day, we were even asked, if you recall, do you want to take a day off or so, to compose yourself? And you said, no, let's do it. And okay, we did it. And that was a shining moment of watching you, because I've watched you and listened to you for years and years and years, 50-something years. And your true nature came out there. Your way of bringing people together has been your philosophy, even more so in the last 20 years or maybe even 10 years or so, about uniting people. And that day, I think you had everybody eating out of the palm of your hand because it was so emotional and so real. It doesn't get any more real than that. And I commend you for that all these years later as the guy who had to sit there and watch you. And you were looking at me most of the time.
Yeah.
I don't know if you were judging my reaction or what, but as a sidekick, I had to be there for you. And that was a tough day. That was a really tough day. And then, of course, we lightened it up the day after with people that came in, women that came in and took off their tops and sat there in their bras. I mean, it was.
Well, you should tell everybody what we did. Actually, there was an NBC tour that took place every day, and women had come up to punk us. And they took their tops off while we were talking. But what they didn't know is behind them was the audience that came in on the tour. And I knew that, and you knew that, and we're looking and waiting for the moment when they turned around and saw that their titties were being shown to everybody who ever came on the NBC tour. Those who were going on their way to see Letterman got a good peek.
Right.
So everything that Howard ever did, everything that he ever did, got done to us. We got, that was an interesting moment. I was shocked.
And let's face it, we also had very talented people with us, like Al Rosenberg and Bill Sheft, who was ended up being one of Letterman's head guys, and so many other people like Brett Butler, the comedian, who ended up with a TV show not many years after she was on our show. We used to do bits with her all the time.
And Chris Doyle, who was our producer too.
Chris Doyle was a phenomenal producer, because he had already worked at NBC and knew the ways of it. He knew how it worked, and he was very helpful to me because I was the one that had to control everything. He was basically in my ear telling me, all right, let's go here, let's do that. And it's very hard to have two masters. You were my master and he was my master. And it's a very tough spot to be in sometimes. And I don't think people realize that on a live show.
We had the same energy, I think, when we went to WABC and KABC years later with the television component. I already had that training from Denver, so I was able to play a little bit to the camera. And you were definitely a big help because of your CBS FM stripes, and you didn't want to go over the line because you were still on the air at CBS FM, and you had to play it carefully. You're on two stations that are owned by different people in New York.
No, I was already gone from CBS FM when we did our WABC show. I was still working when we did the television show out of the NASDAQ building in Times Square.
Yeah, see, I don't consider that to be our radio show. And when you in answer to your question,
no, that was
I
a TV
consider,
show.
but
That
WABC was, and then the other part was WOR. And you know, now that we're doing chapter 9 of my book, the WOR experience was great because of Myra Shannon, who was the producer. She took me on a journey that I would never forget, including Russia and China. We went all over the world, you know, and did the show from Israel, every place with her. And she was just great. Now, why I like WOR is because they didn't know how powerful we were with that show. The management of the station was focused on drive time and making money off of the commercials. They never knew that I was putting America to sleep on a network every night. They knew it, but they didn't really think it was important. And and every time somebody came in, we had a new program director, Maurice Tunick came in, and he took away the midnight hour. And I said, when you take away the midnight hour, which is the Jewish hour and the gay hour, you know, which we call cabaret, when you took that away, then you took away the morning show, because people would go to bed with the radio on 710, and they wake in New York or anywhere. You know, we're on a network, we're on a bunch of stations. So when you wake up in the morning, you have the radio set where you are, and then you got the morning show. But they weren't, you know, it was always what was fun was always sucker punching everybody. That's what you and I were good at. We did that on ABC in New York. KABC in LA was the worst ratings in history ever, and we made it number 2. We were number 2. We did the number 2 on Sunday nights.
We did number 2 in LA. Yes, we were the second. Okay, after KFI, we were the most listened to show on AM radio in that day part. In that day part, yes.
Well, that's when you're. What does it carry? That's when you're on. I don't call it a day part. You're an influencer.
No, we were, and we had quite a bit of people listening that you wouldn't expect to have been listening, and because I remember what was the program director there said that we were too New York. I've been told that a few times in my career too, in Dallas and places like that. But you were too New York oriented. Well, you know what? We did a lot of things about Hollywood stars and people on television, and you were constantly mentioning places that you'd been in L.A. and you lived in L.A. I mean, you know, so it was.
Well, you know, we had the first house on Park Granada in Calabasas, and that now is the Beverly Hills of the Valley. When we were there, it was a dirt road. Nobody cared. It was really a turnaround for at the corner was the movie star home, and Tonto was there. Meanwhile, the Lone Ranger was living next door to us, and he's not in the home, but Tonto was. But you know, I mean, I got to tell you, one of the things was Farrah Fawcett at the time I worked at 20th Century Fox, and that was our show, you know, Charlie's Angels. And Farrah Fawcett lived there at Calabasas with us. She was a tennis player, and she was a model, essentially, and one of Charlie's Angels. But she was married to Lee Majors, who was an actor, movie actor. And so you had Lee Majors and Farrah Fawcett. They were really good people, very fun and nice. And I took a fire hydrant with the 2 faucets on it and put a sign that says, "A pair of major faucets." And
oh my God,
she wasn't too happy about that. But you know, having fun with people like that. No, she laughed. I'm just joking. But you know, when you have that kind of inside stuff that's not serious. You know, now people are, it seems like I'm getting away from the subject, but what people do right now is they start to get into a serious bag. And it's annoying because they want to put their charity up on the television or on the radio. And I wish they would leave that at home. You know, write out a check and shut up. It's just too much of everybody.
Sing your song and be quiet.
Yeah, I mean, everybody tries to be everything. You know, you can't be everything to everybody, and you see that right now. All right. Anyway, I'm sorry. I wanted to answer the long way around, which was WOR, WNBC, KABC, WABC when we were together. Those are the favorite stations. And KB when I was a kid.
Okay. All right. That's good. Well, let's stop on WOR for just a moment, because your book ended in the year 2000. Now, you were still working at WOR.
Yeah, and it's a good thing I didn't write that kind of a book.
People want to know why you left. What happened?
Well, if I had mentioned you in the book, I would have gotten fired. No, I'm not. Why did I leave? All right, here's what happened. The economy shifted. Remember? It was 2008. Mm-hmm. Remember that? Mm-hmm. What happened?
Yeah.
There was no money.
Well,
right.
Money.
So were we in a business that was being swallowed up by major companies? And one of them was this Clear Channel that now is bankrupt. It became iHeart, and it's bankrupt as iHeart. Right. It's bankrupt twice.
Right.
I mean, it's a nice going away party. So what happened was they had a guy named Art Bell who did an all-night show about space shots. And there's still that conspiracy theory. I saw one today where there's a spaceship carrying the coronavirus over the city of New York. That's the latest of the people who are still sci-fi.
Right.
So Art Bell was famous, and he had a guy sit in for him when he quit at Pahrump, Nevada. He had an issue where his kid was being kidnapped.
Yes.
In real life, and he had to duck out of the business for some reason. Nobody knows what the other part of the story is. I'm sure there's a little.
Right. We'll never know now.
No, if it were a sexual thing, we'd know about it, because that's what they do to Harvey Weinstein, who now has the coronavirus. I mean, who deserves it more than a guy who's in solitary? I mean, a guy is all alone, and he caught the virus from himself. But that's another joke. Anyway, sitting there with Art Bell opposite me. And then the company that owned him started to buy all the stations we were on. Mm-hmm. And they were KOA in Denver, which was the one I was on for NBC when they owned it. WTIC, 50,000 watt stations. Big one in WGY in Schenectady, Albany, which is the big number one station. The number one station in Minneapolis. I was on all these stations until Clear Channel bought them. And they bought all the AM stations. That's what Randy Michaels did. And then he put his own shows on there, which was at their company, which is called Premiere. And their one show that was opposite me that I was killing them with was that Art Bell show. However, when they bought all the stations, I was done as the leadership, except in New York, where they could never catch up. And they were on ABC in New York, and they were still having a hard time with me in New York. So they just bought the show. They bought me out. That's the answer to your question.
So they paid WOR. They paid WOR to be on their station.
Yeah, when WOR's banknotes were due, and they couldn't make the banknotes. That's the part you got to know. So Buckley Broadcasting sold their stock and their stations, and I was the one that was costing the least, but I was the one that was their big lead pony. You see, you can't have a syndicated show without New York, L.A., and Chicago. It's a triangle. And you can't, apparently you can't have a disease without that either, frankly.
Yeah, right.
Well, same deal. It's population. Population.
Yeah. Yeah. And the interesting thing that, for me, a guy my age, I like to listen to radio at night, but it seems that you go up and down the AM dial and there's one or two shows on.
Well, because they're all owned by three guys. Three people own everything.
Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, they got rid of you. CBS sold their stations. Does anybody know that? Does anybody know that Disney doesn't own ABC anymore? People don't know that. The company that they built, Disney built WABC again in its second life after the network went away. And
walked away from it.
And they walked away from it and sold it to these scoundrels. These dickheads, and they're named Dickie with a good reason. Their little dickies got sucked by the Federal Communications Commission by allowing them to own more than 7 stations, full complement, 5, 7, and 6. You're not supposed to own more than 5 AM, 5 FM. I think it is.
But it
What? But they relaxed the equal time law, and the Congress wanted to be reelected. You see what they're doing right now. The Congress is arguing right now because the reason they're arguing right now is because they're all running for office. Everybody's always running for office.
Of course.
It's a national plague.
They all have the job to get reelected. That's what it's about.
The real disease is that these guys are the carriers. Now, I mean, not of the coronavirus, but they're the carriers of the other disease, which is greed. Greed has a kissing cousin. It's called lying. They have another one called cheating, another one called stealing.
Yeah. And
they all practice this, not every single one of them, but enough of them to poison the water. Now, nobody wants to talk that way because you get killed.
Yeah, and that has happened to talk show hosts, unfortunately.
Yeah, even Alan Berg. I worked with him in Denver, and he got shot by a group that was wacky, pretty wacky, the neo-Nazi group.
Yeah.
And he would have loved the book that was written about him and the motion picture and the Broadway show, except he got killed to have that. Mm-hmm. I don't intend to die just so you have my story,
Speaking of Broadway shows, you were the guy who played Sherry for 4 hours and got in trouble for it. As depicted in the Broadway show and the movie, you're not the guy. It was a black gentleman who portrayed you as a character.
Yeah.
Frankie Valli was kind of upset about that and tried his best to get it fixed for the movie version, unsuccessfully with the director of that film,
Clint Eastwood. Yeah, but he could have done a lot better. I think Frankie is not really a powerful. He's not politically driven outwardly. He has his own feelings, and he's a great guy and a good friend. But I don't think he would put himself on the line for me. I can't see that.
Have you ever heard the any air checks from those days when you did these stunts? Did you ever listen back, or do you have no desire to do that?
Well, I don't ever listen to something I've done once because I got bored. I already answered that earlier. I'll listen to it when people do that. It's a lot of celebrities will tell you this too when they are in film. Anthony Hopkins is one of them. They don't sneak in the back of the theater to watch their movie. Sometimes they'll say that, but they don't really. Once you've done it, you don't want to see unless you really are Tom Hanks and you want to see how your friend Steven Spielberg edited you. That on that level. But on my level, I don't want. Once I've done something, there's so many shows. We've done too many minutes, too many shows. I don't want to listen to them again.
Yeah. Okay. So you don't care about listening to the skipping record of In the Midnight Hour, WDRC.
No. I did all that already. What are you going to hear from it? I was there. When you're an eyewitness to 9/11, I don't want to do that again either. And when we were on the air for that, do you think I'm going to listen to the tapes of Joy Brown and I when we were there for the blackout? I don't want to do that. Uh-huh. And I don't listen to Jane Dornacker. I never listened to that tape. It's
it's painful. It
really is painful because you're reliving an unpleasant thing, but it's also embarrassing when you're living something. When I was a shock jock, as they called me, I didn't like hearing the behavior that I had because I thought better of myself. But that's an ego thing. I'm a little bit too introspective for that.
Okay. You obviously don't want to listen to Rats in My Room, but you play it quite regularly.
I don't listen to that. I don't listen to my theme song. It's on too many times.
I know. It's a joke. But after you recorded that song, you became very involved in the music industry on the other side of the glass, not on the radio end, by producing music and things like that. How did that evolve?
I owned a recording studio with Tommy Shannon, who was on opposite me. See, Tommy had been the big jock in Buffalo on KB, and I replaced him when he went over to GR to beat us, and it never happened because I came in there and they didn't know that I was going to catch on. Who knew? Nobody knew. And so when I caught on, and I was still friends with Tommy, I always liked his work, and he's a really terrific guy. So we went in business together, and we kind of, as a matter of fact, being opposite each other, I got along better with him than anybody that if I worked with. It was strange. because he had his posse around him, and I had my following, and my following was huge, and he knew that. He knew that I was very popular in the whole country, and he had been one of the guys who was there before me, and he was popular in Buffalo. But the rest of the country, boy, I just caught on like fire. And who knew? You can't tell.
I was one of the people that listened.
But nobody knows.
I was one of the guys that sat by the radio and just couldn't wait to hear what you were going to do next, which was the whole idea. And I think it's still like that for you. I think there are people who truly just admire what you do, and because you're I've even watched some videos of you interviewing people, and you're so fast. Your quickness is unrivaled. I would maybe put you right there with Dick Cavett and people like that who are able to turn on a dime if you have to, and pick up on a vibe that the person's having. I watched Dick Cavett the other night doing an interview with George Harrison, and George Harrison really basically had nothing to say until, and I've seen you do this too, until he was able to pull George out of that being shy mode and turned him into a shining star, and that's a tough gig.
Well,
you do that very well.
Sometimes people don't want to play, and then you have to work around it, and you have to find something they're interested in. That's Charlie Rose used to always he always was good at that in a low key way. Mm-hmm. He did it in a low key. Dick Cavett was a writer for Jack Parr,
Yeah.
I mean, and Joan Hamburg was a writer for what's her name, Arlene Francis. I mean, people started as lackeys, and then they became the celebrity because the other person either. Well, Carol Burnett started with Gary Moore. Gary Moore. Yeah. Right, I mean, you get a boost from somebody. You got to have somebody has to pull you up.
And you did via Howard Cosell and Larry King and people like that early in your career, and you were able to take that. All right, so let's go back a little bit again. I know you don't like to live in the past, and I generally don't either. But I put some favors out for people. I put something on one of my web things and asked people to ask questions for you, about you, and about what's happened since you did your book. And some other people, wanted a little more detail. For example, a guy named Walter from Miami, where you were on television, he says, I liked your TV show here in South Florida. You've done so much in media, but do you ever think you'll retire?
No.
He remembered you from television. Yeah.
Well, I'll retire when I don't know it. If I get Alzheimer's or something like that, I probably won't know that I retired. Well, you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, our minds go, and with the rest of the body, I don't know when.
You're still sharp.
Well, thank you.
You're still sharp. I talk to you all the time, and you are still spot on.
Well,
and I'm not kissing your butt because I don't have to.
No, and it's probably my best defense.
All right.
I would say, I have that the general manager of the station in Hartford, who didn't want to hire me at first. None of them ever do. And then the program director goes in and says, "Oh, we need the ratings," or the sales department, "We need to make money." They like to put up with my crap. But he was Bill Crawford was his name, and he was a gentleman, very much so. And there's a whole story about him. I didn't put anything in the book. But Bill Crawford, when I was in the hospital, I had my operation on my hernia, and I did the show from the bed. And I flushed the toilet on the air, which was unheard of back then,
Nobody ever did.
And I went into the bathroom and I took a leak and I flushed the toilet on the radio. And I said, "Okay, now we're going to play Name That Sound," which was one of our contests. So he came to visit me in the hospital the next day. He says, "I can't believe you," and he gave me a Groucho Marx book, and he said, "That's who you're like." He said, you are like Groucho Marx. He said, you turn these things around and you have wordplay, and you also are in complete control, but you look like a dunce. And he says, you look like you're not.
That's very true.
Yeah, he says, you look like you're not capable. And then all of a sudden, He said, "You're a rattlesnake. You just go for the throat." And he says, "But nobody knows they got bit." He said, "You're like," he said,
Right.
"You know, that's what I see you as." And he gave me the letters to Groucho Marx, letters that Groucho wrote. And I don't know if I still have that book, but that was the way he thought of me. And he said, "So that's your career." He says, "I don't think anybody
To
should
me,
ever get..."
that is
What?
that is the supreme compliment, because there was nobody better than Groucho at being able to take a situation and make it into something that wasn't supposed to be right from the start. Amazing. And you do that. Who's Jay Meyers, by the way? Because he complained about not being in your book either.
Well, Jay was the guy that hired me in Philly. You know, he was originally from, I think, Rochester, New York, and he has.
We're talking about at WFIL in the 80s, before you worked in it.
I came, you know, I was on tour. I did a week here, a week there, and we didn't have the satellite yet for broadcast. We had the one show every week on Satellite Live, but we weren't ready with the thing we have now with Sirius or XM. They were new companies. But, you know, Jay Meyers was a programmer of WFIL in Philadelphia, which had on one side of the station was of the studio was
The building.
the building had an AM studio, which is WFIL. It was really a toilet, and then the one at the other end was that big black station called KISS. You know, that was a franchise. All these black stations, KISS FM.
Mm-hmm.
And that was always run by a white manager, incidentally. You know, which is kind of ironic. They don't do that anymore. But even with Frankie Crocker in New York, you know, he had a white manager. Always a white manager. Even on the recording companies, it was always someone who was a white guy that owned the record company, and all the black guys.
Yeah. And ultimately screwed the black people out of royalties.
Not everybody.
Well,
But it was a common thing back then to not take the money and give it to black people. Now, of course, it's the other way around. But you know, the thing is, we overdo everything. Now we're all black all the time. We're all women all the time. You know, I take shots at Gloria Allred all the time now, as you know.
I know.
But that's a different story.
I watch your raps every day, and I see that there's a common theme coming in.
Well, because we overdo it. That's all I'm saying. Is, you know, can't we have a little bit in the middle? You know, I mean, why do we have to have everything? Why does everything have to have a sequel? I mean, why do we have a series? It doesn't have to be a series. It could be. Do you notice that Netflix don't have movies anymore? Now they got everything is come back. You know, and MTV, when they first went on the air with their format, they played music around the clock. Now they have shows. You know, come back. It's because you can't get an audience to give you loyalty, and unless you have a return. And you know, the big torchbearer in the last couple of years was the. What's the story of the King's Thrones? You know, the King of Thrones, or whatever it's called. I mean, you know, but we're all followers. You know, there's a system of doing something when it's a hit. Everybody follows it. You know, follow the leader, swallow the leader.
But you've never been a follower.
No, and I don't like it. I get bored. Once again, it's only boredom. It's not because I'm antagonistic or anything. I got bored when we were at the Boys Club. We were playing records up on the third floor. And when the reason to do that was to be able to be the guy who could get the girls after the after the dance.
This is as a teenager, you were already bored with doing formats and.
I built an amusement park in my backyard when I was 12 years old. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, well, ask my sisters about it. I charged them to go on a ride. They'll never forget it. I dug holes and used wheelbarrows and made amusement parks. I also had a 60-millimeter projector my father got me when I was a kid for my senior graduation in high school, and I used that to show films. I try to get into a lot of things. I like the adventure. I still do.
You took me on a tour once in Buffalo a few years back, as a matter of fact. And we passed by and stopped at the house that you lived in with a swimming pool in the basement. You don't talk about that much.
It's a grandiosity, you know, that's why. It's a show-off thing. But, you know, Al Martino straightened me out on that one. He was a builder, in Philadelphia. He was a construction guy, and in good shape.
Originally, yeah.
And he sang, and he decided that he was going to be Frankie Fontaine, and that helped make him a star. So he came in to my apartment, which had an indoor pool, a full-service bar, and it was lavish because it was owned by the person who owned the Buffalo newspaper. And they had died, the family died, and my father was partners with somebody in the junk business of cars. And so I inherited the place, and I paid for it. And in that place, I brought a lot of people, many recording artists, and I brought Al Martino, and I was showing off. And he saw my big Olympic heated pool indoors in Buffalo, it better be.
Yeah,
really. And he came inside and he says, "Oh, I see where the paint is falling off the ceilings from the humidity." In other words, instead of being impressed and flattering me, he was correcting everything that was wrong as a construction guy. And I learned my lesson then. I said, "Well, I'm never going to show this off again." But we're good friends,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you were. Yeah. There are a lot of stories that you left out of your book. Would there ever be another book to follow up this one that we're doing an epilogue for at this moment? Would you ever do another book and maybe pull out more stops this time?
I don't know.
I don't know. Different story.
Well, because you have so many. Yeah, but Stephen King used to listen to me. You know that, up in New England, and he wrote about me in Playboy magazine. Well, yeah, and in Playboy magazine he flattered me, because he was a kid and I was a kid, and he listened to me and he liked me. So someone says, "Well, what do you want to get out of all of this? He tells great stories. You want to write a book?" I says, "No, but I sure don't want to be buried in the pet cemetery," was my comment at the time. But then, of course, I liked him very much, and he did a lot of movies. He got into the film thing, which he wasn't at the beginning, with the New Hampshire Hotel, I think, and Shining came. Those are big see, but I worked around enough people to do all of that I got my jollies from it. See, I liked making people famous, and I like supporting them. I enjoy it.
And you do that very well, and it's very subliminal too most of the time.
Yeah, well, see, but that's what I like. See, I don't want to be the guy that I don't need to have 10 or 15 books. It's flattering, but that's not what I do. What I want to do is what I want to do? I'll tell you, it's a very simple thing. I enjoy, even when I'm in pain, doing things for other people. I really like that. I don't know why. I can't tell you why. It's not even because I think there's glory.
It's called give back. And it's paying it forward. And that's a very simple statement, but that's what it is.
I talked to Stedman when he was friends. He was going out with Oprah, and I got friendly with her. And Stedman said to me, he was teaching down in North Carolina, I think it was, and he is a professor. And I said to him, I like pushing people. He said, "Oh, no, Joey, you don't push anybody. You have to pull them up." And he said, you have to pull people up, not push them. So I never forgot that. That was years ago. But, Oprah's done that too. She did that with Gayle King. I always make fun of her. But I enjoy that. I enjoy making fun of them.
Rachel Ray and a few other people too. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, Rachel Ray's she's a very good cook, all these people have good talent, Of the ones that don't and are faking it, I have no time. I don't give them my time.
And you can tell.
It's not that I have to.
You can tell the posers.
But I don't have to write a book about how I don't like someone, and that's what I told Judith Reagan.
Mm-hmm.
She and I were friends, and Judith had written Private Parts and many other things, and I said to her, she said, "You've got to do a telltale book," and I said, "No, why do I want to do that? Why do I have to sit here and I do these bad jokes about people." But I'm not on this planet to ruin someone's life. I'm here to make fun of some of them because it's absurd. Monty Python, absurd, that kind. They even made fun of Jesus.
Yeah,
but that's not their soul. That was their humor. Because they thought it was funny. And I think a lot of things are funny, but they're inappropriate. And one of the
having said that, in one of your ad libs someplace, you said you really didn't like the book, Let a Smile Be Your Umbrella, but Don't Get a Mouthful of Rain. You really didn't like it. What do you mean by that?
Well, because I don't have to read it again, and I did it this time. This is the honest to God's truth. I never read that book once since I wrote it until I was able to do the chapters, and then I corrected some of it because a lot of it was crap. And I said, no, this is not right, or I forgot this. Like I forgot mentioning you. That was an inappropriate thing because we journeyed a lot together. Well, no, I mean really, I apologize for that. And even Jay Meyers, Jay hired me in Philly because he saw me on the beach one day. I was a guest, and I got the crowd on the beach to cheer me. And he never saw that on radio. And we were doing a remote. And he then said he did everything he could to get me hired there. And Bruce Holberg didn't want to hire me because he was a little too conservative, Plus, they had the number one station. The black station was number one. And we outperformed them because they didn't do anything for Ethiopia, which is a black country. They didn't do anything to raise money,
including the rock stations, in Philadelphia.
Yeah, who had U2, and they had Bono, and they didn't even honor him at that time. But I got out and did a telethon, a radiothon rather, on the radio without taking money from anybody but the public, and I stopped cars, and I did that instinctively. And my wife joined in, and everybody, and she had just had the baby. She was pregnant with another one, and we were very involved with community, and I liked that. I was never shy at NBC. We went outside and did things on the street every day. I was disappointed that the station was. I think sometimes the stations don't want to do what I want to do, and I have a hard time with that. Because I don't like what they do. I would never have done what people have done.
I'm not on your scale, if you will, but on a different plateau. I was at CBS FM for 8 years, and I obviously was not right for them toward the end. I don't know if it was because of my age. I don't know if it was.
No, well, wait a minute. Let me stop you. They sold the station.
I didn't want to read liner cards.
They sold the station. They didn't want you to do anything because they sold the station. When people are going to sell something, they want you to just make it shine so that it looks better to the buyer. Yeah. It's real estate.
Well, I can do that too, but like you, I got bored.
They would rather that you sit there. They would rather that you sit there and be polite and keep the ball rolling while they make their business deal because they're not in it for the same reason you are. That's the problem.
Right. Yeah. Well, I was in it to be an entertainer.
And they were in it to make money. Yeah. And they don't go together.
Yeah. Do you have any regrets, to paraphrase Sinatra? Do you have any regrets of the things that you did or didn't do in your career? Because you've done a lot of things, but on air, off air.
Yeah, I have many regrets. One of them was embracing cocaine. That's a regret. That's a big one. I got sober 40 years ago, and I was able to come out of this. I almost died. Yeah, and so this is my the finish at this point is age, but it's my second life, and you get old and you die. That's what happens. It's part of life. Death is part of life. Isn't that interesting?
Claude Hall used to say, "You're born, you do, and then you go."
Yeah. Well, then you hope that you leave something behind for those that you love, and it's a gratitude list. So there's a whole thing about it.
How would you like to be best remembered? Should that day come at any time in the intermediate future?
Well, the works of love are the works of love. Well, a work of love. That's it. A labor of love. Okay. I like what Freddie Clistine at Buffalo used to say. You know, they don't understand you in management. They'll never understand you. On your tombstone, it's going to say, nobody liked him but the people. You know.
You know what? That should be on there if you ever need one, you know.
Well, I'm going to need one.
If you ever need one of those.
You mean if you can afford one?
Yeah.
We don't know what's going to happen on this planet right now, but I think one of the things that's happening that's good is that the environment's getting clean. So for what everybody ever fought for, without the fossil fuel in the air right now and without all of the screwing around in the ocean,
what happens when this all is over? What, we go right back to the way we were, or
no? Oh, never. Nothing ever goes back. Don't put any money on that one. Nothing ever goes back. It goes in another direction. Right, now, will we make mistakes again?
Our existence will change.
Well, you know, write to the management if you don't like it here. There's an owner's manual from heaven. It's, if you want to complain to the management of the planet. And it's not Art Bell's best friend either, you know.
One more question. Why does your sidekick insist on weaseling his way into every photograph?
Oh, I don't think you do that at all. Can you hear me? It cut out.
Some people think that I do.
It cut out right as you asked that question.
I actually think that I do.
No, that's not true. That's not true at all. I lean on you because listen. Somebody has to set him up, and another person. Well, because someone has to set him up, and another one's got to knock him over. That's Abbott and Costello. It's everybody who ever did anything except Emmett Kelly, who had a broom, and he was in the spotlight that he couldn't keep together. You know, I mean, that's the routine. It's what you do. You entertain people by failing. People love to see failure so they can relate to it, but they like to see success. They don't want to see you die in the end. They want to see you make a comeback, and then they want to see you be polite with them. Probably the best of all those entertainers that I've ever seen in my whole life, of all of them, was Red Skelton, because he had another talent. He was a painter, an artist, a true artist, and he was a nice man, and he was smart, but he did something that you wouldn't do. He traveled with a priest. Everybody's got something, Jay. His sidekick was a priest. And you're not you're no minister.
I'm glad. I'm no minister. I don't even know. I don't even have a shirt that fits right now.
Oh yeah, you do. You got shoes that fit, Joey, and I'm not going to nail them to the door.
This has been great. I'd like to thank some of the people that helped ask some of these questions, because I didn't come up with all of these by myself. Listeners and people that like you and love your work, and you've had quite a career, and it's not done yet. And I said one final thing. I've got to ask you this. Because we don't have a farm team to teach what you and I know how to do, we don't have a B and C squad anymore, like baseball has, a AAA team, a AA, a single A. We don't seem to have much of that anymore in the broadcasting business. And I see virtual rookies, even on major television stations, doing the news these days. Do you think it's time for the broadcast industry to take in people like us and say, "Oh yeah, Joey Reynolds"?
Well, let's put it down to basketball. The best coach is the guy who runs the Miami Heat. Used to be Boston Celtics, and he's the president of the company. He hires a coach. The coach, Bill Parcells. There's a lot of great ones in football, baseball, basketball.
Well, Bill Parcells is a football coach.
Yeah, right. In every sport, there's a coach, and that's what makes the difference in the team.
Yeah.
So you have to have a coach.
Yeah.
Now, what we're missing is not only the personalities, because you want to give young people a shot, but there's no good coach. Mm-hmm. There's not that I could name. I mean, there may be some that are in the closet. I don't know who they are. But we had great coaches. When you began, there was a great coach, and I was a great coach too. For you, and you have to pass it on.
Yeah.
And why I was a great coach was because you took what you needed from me and you became your own person. but you have to
Yes,
take
precisely.
what someone has and digest it and dissect it, and then go on with the next person whose brain you pick. That's what makes a good
Mhm.
coach, is someone who is
Yeah.
who gives you all the choices, but doesn't insist that you do everything his way.
Right, and I believe that I've done that in my career, emulating what you did for me and people
Yeah.
like me. It's not just me. I mean, you've helped a lot of people along the
Well,
way.
it's like Stedman. It's pull him up. Pull him up. That's what he said.
Yeah.
And
I
that's a
love
good
it.
coach.
Yeah, Joey, this has been fun. I wish we just go on forever with this. We could, but I think we stumbled on a lot of things today that would considerably be the epilogue of the book. The okay, what's happened since? And we tapped into some of the things you didn't get into, perhaps in the first writing of the book. But I hope this one answered a lot of questions. I hope it did.
Well, don't ask me to listen to this again.
No, I know you won't.
Because then I'll have to.
There's no question you won't.
No, then I have to edit it like I did my book.
Really.
I say, I'm sorry I said that,
All right,
Jay.
well, yeah.
Did we leave anybody out? Is there anybody I should mention?
Oh God.
Oh yeah, God. Let's mention him.
Yeah. Well, with Tim Whitaker, Charlie Roberts. He was in the book, though.
Yeah.
Trying to think of oh my gosh, there are probably hundreds that we've left out, and I don't want it. We're certainly not doing it on purpose, but we've also come across some characters as well, some people that were not quite up to the task at times, and they held us back a little bit at times. But ultimately, it falls on your shoulders and my shoulders when we're together. It ultimately does, and I'm very proud to have been, by your side on a lot of these things, on a lot of the projects that you've been on.
Well, you made a hit. That's what you've done.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
In my way, yeah. Thank you.
So,
That's great.
what did you get for all of this? You got a smile and an umbrella.
Yeah, and I don't want to get a mouthful of rain.
It's a Reynolds Rap.